All right, guys, welcome to another episode here of the Vital Tradition podcast. Got a very special guest today. This is Roy Vivian, pro walleye angler and local sheephead expert. He's here to chat with us a little bit today about, the life of a pro angler for one, and hopefully shed some tips on, how do we get started fishing? It's probably been a long time since you've been a beginner, but we're itching to hear what you've got to say about it. So I'll let you take the floor, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm not a sheephead expert. I know that disappoints you, but I do catch a few by mistake. I don't target them, but no, I'm really happy to be talking to you today about really getting started. And a long time ago, I'm getting pretty old, but I didn't have much growing up, and we had a Zebco 202 that my
Nice.
dad and my brother and we shared as we got a limit of walleyes, and we did it from shore. We didn't have a boat, and that kind of got me hooked on it. And really, it's that simple. You can just get out with a rod and a reel, and the oldest swim bait probably around, which is a 4-inch twister tail and a lead head, and you can catch some fish. So I look forward to talking a little bit more about getting started and maybe a couple tips that might hopefully help some people.
Yeah, no, that's sounds awesome. Fast forward, what's your angling stick currently?
So I wouldn't say that. So I'm certainly not a full-time professional by any means, but I am. I just don't have enough vacation time. But I do get throw my hat in the ring, and for the National Walleye Tour, I'll be fishing 2 events this year: the Sturgeon Bay at the end of May, which will be real exciting, and then also Lake Erie at the end of June. And I'll get this year started at the Masters Walleye Circuit on the Illinois River. And believe it or not, that'll be in a month.
That is
So
hard to
it's kind
believe.
of hard. I'm looking out right now, and it's
Yeah.
-1 or -2 degrees.
Mm.
So to think that it's only 4 weeks away or 5 weeks away to fishing open water and catching some walleye and sauger on the Illinois River is really, we're kind of on hump day. We're
Yeah.
the worst of the winter. I think we're in it right now, and it's
Boy,
we
I
get
hope
nothing
so.
but better.
Yeah, like you said, I hope tonight is the turning point. We've kind of hit the low, and we're gonna come back up. I hope we're on that trend. Oh man, a month away from open water fishing from a boat. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, and really, you can do it. You'd be able to do it sooner. We're in Madison. I'm not sure where your viewers are, but they're probably not too far away from somewhere where you can do some open water fishing. Certainly, if you're along the Mississippi River, there's some power plants that keep the water open. Pool 3, uh, or just above Red Wing, Minnesota,
Okay.
is a power plant there that keeps Red Wing open. And as soon as the temperature gets close to 32 degrees there, then you can find some open water, I'm sure.
Oh, that's great.
But definitely by the end of the month, there's opportunities.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it's a new adventure for me. I have not spent a whole lot of time on the river systems, period, in my life fishing. Most of my fishing was Great Lakes and inland lakes. So the river's a new beast for me, and I hope to continue to learn. So your first tournaments on the river, how many river tournaments do you typically fish a year? I know you mentioned 2 Great Lakes bodies of water. Can you talk a little bit about the different fisheries you come across as a pro angler?
Yeah, so most of the tournaments are going to be in the upper Midwest, where really in the heart of walleye country.
Sure.
And unfortunately, there aren't very many river tournaments. The Master Walleye Circuit has done their opener on the Illinois River basically since it started in the late 80s. And the one of the issues with river tournaments is sometimes you can't control what Mother Nature is going to do. There's been or a couple that have been over the years that have been postponed. Last year, the National Walleye Tour was supposed to be on the Mississippi River in Red Wing. I think 2 years in a row it was canceled due to high waters. We had a lot of snow 2 years ago, and that creates some issues. So because tournaments, you have to, you have to do quite a bit of planning, and it's pretty hard to change something on the fly. And rivers can be a little driven by Mother Nature. So lakes tend to be a little bit easier to kind of hedge against that bet. But
Okay.
really, the Great Lakes are obviously, they hold a lot of walleyes. So those are tournaments that are often very popular tournament sites. But some of the Lake Winnebago here in Wisconsin usually holds one every year by one of the circuits. One of my favorite tournaments was up on Leech Lake for the National Walleye Tour. Just incredible fishery. One of my favorite, maybe my best pre-fishing week ever. Just tremendous. Didn't do as good as I'd hoped in the tournament, but really fun. And what's great about the diversity of fishing tournaments is you have to learn different bodies of water, different techniques at different times of the year, and it really
Sure.
makes you a better angler.
Yeah, totally. That's I can't even imagine doing it on a scale, competing against some of the best anglers in the world and having to process all that new information, potentially new information. Obviously, if you fish the body of water in previous years, then maybe it's not completely starting from scratch, but you're processing the current conditions. Like you said, every year is different. Even on the same body of water, it may not set up exactly the same, or something may be producing this year that wasn't before. It's a very, very amazing to sit back on the outside and look at people that are able to do that. And it's really incredible. So how long have you been tournament fishing on the pro circuits?
So it's kind of a funny story, but I started in 2006 on the Illinois River, and I was only going to fish that one tournament. I had an older boat. The motor broke down 2 days before the day before the tournament started.
Of course.
So all I had was my kicker motor.
Oh
And I
man.
went to the local bait shop, and I was fishing or my partner and I were fishing by ourselves, and we kind of were feeling down and out. Talked to the guy at the bait shop, and he said, "Hey, some of these tournaments have been won close to the boat launch. You believe it or not, you might be able to catch some fish." And he kind of walked through some areas
Yeah.
to try. And day one, we caught one fish. We were 186th out of 220 boats, feeling pretty low. And then day two, we miraculously caught the 10th heaviest bag of the day and shot all the way up to 56th. And
Wow.
then I was hooked forever.
Yeah, no, that's incredible.
Since then, I've fished multiple, at least several tournaments a year since.
Oh man. Yeah, that's awesome. So that's a good run. Did you always know you wanted to be a pro fisherman, like take fishing to the top level that you could, or was that something that kind of came later in life?
Well, certainly it was something that I aspired to do, but I really didn't think I'd have the opportunity to do so.
Okay.
I followed the professional walleye tour in the 90s, but I really didn't have the means or the boat to do anything like that. But when I moved to Madison in 2001, I really got into fishing again. I played baseball in college, and I'm going back here a little ways, but growing up, I just loved to fish. Then I went to college, played baseball, and really didn't have as much time to fish.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I got out of college and I moved back up into the Madison area, I really got into fishing again. And it just kind of grew from that basic instinct. And really, the fact that I was able to start fishing tournaments and then have some success along the way, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, that is really cool. You mentioned that Zepco 202. That's probably back when everything was metal parts and
yeah, well, I
made
don't
real
know.
sturdy, huh?
Maybe I should check my mom's basement. I bet you there's still remnants of at least the rod. And I bet you that rod couldn't have been that standard rod that you would buy from Walmart
Oh
or
yeah.
Farm and Fleet or wherever is probably 5 foot long
Yep.
or 5 feet long, and maybe 5.5 feet long. But
Oh
yeah, and
yeah.
the line came out. It was 10-pound test,
Yep.
and it coiled off like a slinky.
Oh, it was
So you
bad.
had to use a pretty heavy jig to keep her straight. For sure. But it really doesn't, what's neat. I mean, the technology in fishing has just been amazing.
Oh,
We've gone through a
yes.
revolution really in the last 15 years for sure. And it's getting better. The last 10 years has been unbelievable.
Yeah.
Really, you don't, if you're talking just shore fishing, you don't really need much. And you still could, if you've got a rod with line on it and it casts a little bit, you can catch fish.
Yeah, I agree. I had similar experience with Zepco. I think one of the first, let's say, adult rods, because obviously my first rod was a Mickey Mouse pole that we'd call an ice fishing pole nowadays
Right.
as a kid, but it seemed like a full size rod when I was holding it. But the step up from there, the very next rod was a Zepco 33 with a rubber pistol grip handle. And kind of like we were talking about, all metal parts. The reel, I think, might have had hard plastic yeah, thumb rests on it, but it was still all metal. And yeah, spooled with just it was like pre-twisted 10-pound line. It's unbelievable how nasty that stuff came out of there, but didn't matter, caught a couple. I think I remember catching a couple bass on it for the first time, and it was just, this is awesome. Yeah, that was a similar experience. Just really incredible to kind of go from thinking about the first time figuring out how a rod and reel works, catching a fish and kind of putting the pieces together, and fast forward to now where, like you were starting to get into, it's like technology is almost exponential each year. Yeah, like 10 years ago, there might be a bracket where you could say, here's a big jump, and then 15, but now it's almost like every year your eyes are like wide open and what's coming out on the market. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it really has. And the other thing that's occurred with it is it's kept prices, there's so much competition now that prices really haven't gone up tremendously. Now, if there, that's I'm saying that with a grain of salt,
Unless
but
you want 3D technology,
right,
and
if
then you're pay for it.
yeah, there's a lot of technology you can really pay for. But
Yeah.
if you're looking, I mean, if you're depending on where you are and what you want to do fishing wise, but just a GPS, I mean, probably the most important thing that you can have on a boat right now would be just a sonar and a GPS. If you
Yep.
just have that, and that is really affordable right now. And the image, in color, crystal clear. It's a fast processor. You can see it in bright conditions, just fantastic. And it's, I mean, very affordable. And, I remember the first sonar GPS that I had was black and white. And you can buy a color one now for, a much bigger screen than what you could back then in a black and white model.
Yeah, it's pretty
grayscale or
incredible.
whatever it was. I can't remember.
Yeah, same. I think probably the same thing with some of those underwater cameras. I remember seeing some of the old school Aquavus that looked like you were bringing your old, big flat screen floor model out on the ice. It was all black and white.
If you need one, let me know. I've got one.
Oh yeah, you need a separate sled for those. But yeah, it really is incredible. For shore fishing, have you seen some of those? Like I think Deeper is one of the brands. They're kind of marketed as portable sonar, but they've kind of got their own little niche in the portable market where they float, they could be casted. So like basically they're trying to provide sonar to shore fishermen or people without a boat, or alternative flotation devices, so kayaks, inflatables, that kind of stuff. Have you had any experience with that sonar and how it compares nowadays to like what would be considered like conventional sonar units?
I do not. I can't really speak to those, other than I think that most of those or some have compatibility to your phone.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And if you have, I have an iPhone, one of the later models, and
Or an iPad or something.
yeah, or you could do an iPad, and then you can get that image through Bluetooth
That'd be pretty cool.
technology to get it back. And so you're going to see a really good image. But yeah, there's really unlimited options, I think, right now. And, and depending on where you're fishing, it could make a huge difference in catching fish.
Yeah, I can think of a couple short spots just off the top of my head where if you knew where the hole was in that channel, and I know where the hole is because I went over with a boat, but if you were standing on shore with no boat, but you could figure out where that hole was, that's a game changer. Your day is totally different. So that's a really cool option for shore fishermen who are interested in sonar technology. I don't have personal experience with it, but
as you mentioned that, I can totally see if in a river situation where you're really not sure where the drop off is or where the hole is, just throw it out and let the current take it over, and which would help you pinpoint your cast to see where the fish are hanging.
Yeah.
Or potentially to be hanging.
Yeah. Pretty incredible. So your focus is walleye. And you kind of walk through the tournament fisheries that you cover. So some of the different bodies of water that you fish on a professional level. Of those bodies of water, which one is your favorite fishery and why?
So that is a really tough question. I'm going to give you two different answers.
All right.
So one, by far my favorite, is the Mississippi River.
Okay.
I grew up, I didn't have a boat, so everything I did was from shore. I think that really helped me with being able to read current, find current seams, get a sense where fish like to sit. And then you expand it with the Mississippi, which is, much bigger than anything that I ever fished growing up from shore. And just seeing how walleyes relate to current, and just by far my favorite way to fish. I mean, that they have they have wing dams, so rock spines that push water out into the main channel that are really havens for, or just phenomenal structure for walleyes. And it takes a little time to figure out how to fish those, but if you can figure out how to fish them effectively, it's just a blast, and I just love it. And you can catch small ones to 10 pounders. It's just a fantastic fishery. However, awesome. Probably my favorite, if there's one place that I would recommend that everybody try at one point, it would be the Detroit River in April. It's not going to be, it's a spring walleye run bite.
Yep.
But the, vertical jigging to catch 3 to 7 pound walleyes that just about rip the rod out of your hand it's like no other.
It sounds incredible.
And if you hit the conditions right, I mean, it can really vary on wind and rain. And if you get a lot of wind, it gets muddy, or you get a lot of rain, Lake St. Clair will push down some mud, and it can be difficult, and you can spend a whole week out there and not do very good. But if you catch it right, I mean, you can catch 50 walleyes in a day, vertical jigging, and it's just the funnest thing to do by far.
Okay.
But I like to jig. Some guys like to troll, but I prefer to jig.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if that's kind of like, it sounds like jigging's the way to go then for you.
And on the river, for the most part, that's what most people do. Although that's where, if you've heard of pole lining or hand lining, that's one of the ways that they catch fish out there for sure. But if you're on the Detroit River in April, most likely you're jigging.
Okay. Got it. So part B to that question is now from the perspective of all the beginners listening, or people who want, maybe not total beginners to fishing, but have never fished walleye. What would be your recommendation from a fisheries perspective that would give the most opportunity to learn, kind of the best experience for a beginner? So where would you tell a beginner to go fish of the fisheries you just talked about. So we've got your favorites. Now, where would you point a beginner?
So I'll go with my comfort zone. And I think most in the Midwest have access to a small to medium sized river that has walleyes, even the
Okay.
Mississippi for that matter. And to me, it's just a really fun way to fish. It's an easy way to fish. You don't have to spend a lot of money on tackle. The two things that I always use is a 1/4 ounce jig with a 3 or 4 inch twister tail. And then I always have a number 13 Rapala chartreuse if I'm fishing in kind of some dark water.
Sure.
Those are the two things that I use. And if you're, here we are, it's -2 degrees right now. But once you start to get runoff, there's going to be the rivers are going to start rising, and there's fish that are sitting in those deep wintering holes right now, close to dams. They're going to start moving up as soon as this snow melt starts. And it's just a fun way to fish. There's a lot of places that you can get access and near these dams. Like we're talking in the Madison area, but the Wisconsin River, there's several places real close by. The Rock River, you have the Pecatonica River down in northern Illinois. Just a lot of options, and it's super easy to fish. Just cast and wind a 3 or 4 inch twister tail or a Rapala, and you can catch not only numbers, but you can catch really big fish as well. And
Okay.
that bite will, depending on where you are, will last from late February, early March into, just about tax time. The spawn should be over, but the
Okay.
males will stick around until early May. And
Gotcha.
then the white bass will come in, and after the white bass, it's probably pretty much done, and then you'll have to go a little deper to catch them. So
Okay.
that would certainly be from the river standpoint. And if it was lakes, it would be really, it's going to depend on the lake that you're fishing. I think, like the Madison chains fishes differently than Minnesota lakes, but probably the best thing that you can do is just get involved locally. There's fishing clubs that you could get in touch with, or, probably the single best thing you could do is become friends with a bait shop.
Sure.
Like here in Madison, DNS, there aren't a lot of independent bait shops anymore. But the ones that do, support them, and they will support you by helping you learn how to fish. I learned so much from Gene at DNS when I first moved to Madison on how to fish the Madison chain. I wasn't tournament fishing. I had a really old bad boat that worked sometimes, and it took me a while, but over a few years I started catching more and more fish, and it just kind of whet my thirst. But the other thing is there's just so many ways to catch fish. There's not like you might hear people talk about this lure or that presentation. There's just hundreds of ways. And the best advice I can give is just go fishing, try different things.
Okay.
Be on the water, just like anybody that's working on a craft. The more that you do it, the more you practice, the better you're going to become. And if you fish with someone else, just be observant. I've been amazed at what people catch, or how people catch fish. Though I remember when I first started to learn how to vertical jig on the Mississippi River, some of the baits the guys I was fishing with were using, I'm like, you'll never catch anything. I mean, I grew up, you had to use a pink head and a white twister tail or a chartreuse. They're using these ringworms and these just ugly looking baits. They would call it motor oil and just weird stuff to me, but they caught fish, and it really expanded. It really opened my eyes to what, just don't get hard-headed about it. Just be open to it, and you'd be surprised, and you can learn so much from others.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I want to kind of circle back a little bit to your 1-2 punch when you were just starting to touch on the beginner aspect for fisheries. Can you go and maybe just give a quick gear loadout? So for somebody who wanted to do this for the first time and is open to going to pick up their first couple of gear items, what would your buy list look like for a beginner? Maybe just a real short list of essentials.
Yeah, so if you're river fishing, this is for spring and fall when you're casting those 1/4 ounce jigs or with a twister tail. So, a 6.5. I prefer a 7-foot rod, but an all-around really good rod is a 6.5-foot rod. I like using a medium with a really soft or light fast action.
Medium power.
Or power, yeah, or light power.
Okay.
Probably a light power would be preferable, is what I like to use best.
Okay.
And you match that with a reel that matches that rod, so it balances nice. There's a number of manufacturers. I use Shimano rods, and they have basically just about every, if you go on the price range of a Shimano reel, they've got different models that fit different people, but they are consistent. Like they have a 2500, they have 1,000 and a 2500, and I would use a 2500 series reel. I think it's a Sedona is their entry level
okay.
to a Stratic. And I think for beginners, one thing that I would highly recommend is to use braided line. I use Power Pro is what I prefer, but there's a number of braided lines out there. And the reason is with the spinning reel, there's potential for twist. And mono is notorious for twisting and causing tangles, whereas with braid, it doesn't tangle that, or it doesn't spin, and it doesn't have memory. And you can reduce any kind of tangles with braided line, I think.
Okay.
Make a tremendous amount of difference. And most rivers that I'm fishing, they're not super clear, so you don't have to worry about, the fish seeing your line for that matter.
Sure.
I use, if you go to any of whether it's a bait store or one of the big boxes, they'd put that line on for you, or you can do it yourself. It's real easy to do. I use in the river like that, probably a 6-pound diameter, a 20-pound test, something like that. And that line will last you for years.
Yeah. I think most of my spinning reels, I'm backed with 10 or 15 pound Power Pro myself, braid. I will say a couple comments for people who are looking to go do this. The first time I ever spooled braid was on a bait caster before bass fishing for one of the first times that I was trying to learn how to use a bait. It's probably like 11 years ago. And I just could not for the life of me figure out why my drag was not working. I had it cranked all the way down. And come to find out, I didn't have any backing on the braid or like a piece of silk tape or something for the braid to grab onto the spool. And nobody had explained that to me. I did everything else right. I bought the right line. The diameter was right. It was spooled correctly. And there wasn't too much line on it. So you did all the pieces of the puzzle. It looks like on paper, like if you look at your spool, it looks perfect. Like this is what it should look like, but it wasn't functioning correctly. Even though it casted and retrieved, it would just spin if you had any resistance on there. So one of those take-home points for you beginners out there trying that is you want to take either some monofilament line, which is, I would actually probably recommend not doing this option as a beginner because it involves some line splice tying and so forth. But you can use a segment of mono to back right onto the metal part of the spool and then spool your braid. Or the easier way is you get a piece of silk athletic tape and you tear off, not a ton, just one layer of it. And you tape the braid to your spool, the metal part of your spool, and then start reeling and spooling your reel with your braid. And the braid will actually grip that piece of silk tape and it will not spin on there for you. And I learned that the hard way on like 3 reels. It was pretty embarrassing, but it's a good laugh now. But I hope you guys can learn from, my tomfoolery.
I I had a similar experience, so I know exactly what you're talking about. The, another, that's a great point. And when you, even if you are a beginner, if you, if all you have to do, just YouTube it, just type in spooling a spinning rod. There's so much great advice out there. I do it all the time when am, I keep forgetting how to do an arbor knot, which is a great knot to tie.
Yep.
For tying it for your spool. So I always have to go on YouTube to remember how to do an arbor knot. So yeah, it's really a great point, and it is something that you would definitely want to put some backing on for sure.
Yeah. I think another thing we should, I kind of want to ask your opinion on this, but at least point out braided line is a little bit different in the sense that you can't just yank on it. So let's say you get caught on a rock and you go to pull your line with your hand and it's not coming. You can actually cut yourself with braided lines. You do have to be cognizant of that if you are going to fish with just straight braided line versus having some component of fluorocarbon or mono on there as well. So as a beginner, you want to be aware you don't want to just reef on braid on your bare hand. You'll be able to cut yourself pretty good doing that. And then part B to that is when you do get hung up on rocks or logs, you're probably going to lose some jigs. Because you're going to have to, if you bury that barbs in like a log, you're just not going to get it back most likely if it's soft or whatever. So just be prepared to lose a couple more that you're not going to be able to bounce out as well as you would with other lines. Because that braid's not going to give. It's not going to snap off. So you may have to actually cut it. So have a pair of scissors with you at all times when you're fishing with braid, just for multiple reasons, but you're going to want to be able to cut it without using your hands to pull and reef on it.
Yeah, for sure. And a couple of tips that I've learned over the years with that is if it is wood, I like to use jigs that have a kind of a softer or have some flexibility that will bend. So if it's wood, so what I'll do is I'll just hold on to the spool itself. So I'll put my two left fingers on the spool and I'll point the rod straight at it and I'll pull real slow. And by doing that, if it's if it's wood and that hook is bent, or the hook is able to bend, it will bend and then come right on out. Or if you have to break it, again, just point it straight at it because you don't want to put all that stress on the rod.
Right.
Or you're gonna if you do it with your hands, you're gonna definitely cut your hands. But that's why I really like the Power Pro. When I first started using, I think way back when it was Fireline, and it seemed like you could pull in like a sunken boat with that stuff if you wanted to. It was really hard to break, and when it would break, you would have to cut it because you just didn't know where it was going to break, and it just was difficult. With Power Pro, it's super strong, but at the same time, it will break, especially on those smaller diameters. And when I vertical jig when I'm in the boat, I'll use a 2-pound diameter and a 10-pound test. But certainly both of those are really good points about making sure or using braided line versus mono. And then if you are using mono, and there's nothing wrong with that for sure, is if you start using braid, then you're going to realize how much you don't like mono because it stretches, and it is actually hard to break if you're used to breaking with the braid. It stretches so much.
Yeah, that's another good point. Going back the other way, or you're stretching, like when is it going to break, kind of a deal.
Yeah, and then it creates memory, and so I think you're going to weaken the line over time.
Yeah, there's that's going to be tricky.
Tips. I probably shouldn't tell this, but this is aimed at the kind of the maybe newer into fishing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's certainly some tricks on how to get your bait out. And when I was, I think freshman year in college, I was back for the summer. And I was fishing smallmouth, and I had a 3-inch or a number 3 Mepps spinner with a squirrel bucktail. And if you take your line between the reel and that first guide and kind of pull it back, like, you load the rod, you let that go, it releases the tension on the rod, and it sometimes will flick the bait out. Well, I did that, and that number 3 MEPS came back and hit me in the nose and stuck. And I am not kidding. It was shot at me like an arrow.
Oh my gosh.
So
I was going to say it looked like you were drawing a bow, and I
it's
have
exactly
seen and
yes.
have seen that. I've tried it a couple times. Works really well on like wedged bolt. Like if you're just wedged between boulders, you're not actually hung up on anything. That's a really great time to use that technique.
Yes, but be careful and be ready to duck.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's not fun. But hey, that's you wear glasses, right?
Yeah, well,
Protect
yes,
your eyes. Yep.
in that case, I wasn't, but good thing it hit me in the nose. And it did.
Yeah.
I did have to do an ER visit to get that, or urgent care to get
Oh,
that
really?
removed.
Yeah,
Oh,
that
yes.
wasn't just take care of it yourself deal, huh?
No, it's a couple of my friends still call me Hook Nose to tell me.
Oh man. Well, I think the next question I want to ask is, if you don't mind, if you could break down walleyes from your perspective. Over the years, you've probably progressed and just really fine-tuned every aspect of walleye fishing, but specifically seasonality. So I feel like I kind of want to get a little window into your thought process of jumping from fall to winter to spring to summer, and how you can maybe switch it up, and it's almost like second nature, where you're like, okay, well, here's at this point in the year, here's what's going to be a starting point. Like it maybe isn't the ticket, but it's going to be like real close, and I'll be able to just tweak it a little, and we're going to be going. And just kind of walk through that, like how somebody could work their way to that mentality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's different. I think by body of water, whether you're doing rivers or lakes. But
Sure.
I'll give you an example of what I learned on the Madison Lakes and around seasonality. And what I found is that maybe one of the best things that you could do is keep a journal. If you're, I'm not real good at a journal, but if you've got something, however you record what your days out fishing, what I found in Madison is by the calendar, the fish will react and be in similar spots at similar times of year after year after year. And once you can kind of crack that code, then you really have a blueprint of how to catch fish all summer or all through the open water season.
Okay.
And the first thing that I learned when I came to Madison is anywhere where the sun hits the bottom of the lake, there will be weeds. And as those weeds progress, fish are always going to be around them, or at least in the beginning. So as the first thing I found out is once those weeds hit the top of the surface, that there was a really good bite right on the edge of the weeds, whether it was a slip bobber, casting a jig, or you could do a crankbait. And so that was usually about the third week of June, and those fish would stay there second week to June to third week of June, and they'd stay there until about the first week of July.
Okay.
And so I knew every year I could go do that same thing, but I wasn't catching anything in May, and I wasn't catching anything in July and August. And so, but I was going back to the same spot, like, it was kind of the definition of stupidity,
really fine tuning that spot.
Yeah. So I was like really checking it out. And maybe that's where my sheep's head experience comes
there. See, you're just practicing another species.
Right.
Multitasking.
For sure. And then I spent a little bit, time on the water certainly helps. I went to a number of seminars, try to learn more. And then, it became clear that there were fish in the weeds, but I wasn't really fishing for them right. So in May, I started using a jerk bait over the top of weeds, and I caught a couple fish, and I was like, nice. I'm going to expand this. And so then I looked for weed flats, and I casted those jerk baits. So like on Lake Mendota, I'm sure the second week of May until the first week of June, I feel pretty good that I could catch some fish throwing a jerkbait. Another time I was
Sure. Like everything else in that lake, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and you'll catch bass, crappies,
Yeah.
northern, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
Another time that I was at the boat launch, and this was early on, I hadn't caught anything, and I see these guys, how'd you do? And they're like, oh, it was great. I'm like, what? And they had a limit of walleyes, and I'm like, how did you catch? Because I went to
Yeah.
every spot that I thought I knew, and they said they were fishing in 3 to 5 feet of water. I'm like, where can that be? And so I started thinking about it, and sure enough, it was in 3 to 5 feet of water, but it's where the Yahara River comes in. So it's the North Bay there.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that water warms up first. You probably, if you go there in May,
Yeah.
there's a good chance that you'll see carp on the surface,
Mhm.
and the walleyes are in there eating the carp eggs. And so then I realized, okay, in May, that water and that anything on the north side of the lake is going to warm up first, especially dark water. And then I found some areas there. So I know I could go up there in May and catch fish, or I can cast jerk baits over the grass in May. So then now I've got May kind of figured out.
Yeah.
And June, okay, what's happening in July? And that's really where the electronics and as I got better at fishing, started to learn that these fish had moved out to whether it's basically the deep structure, so deep rock on the lake. And they started in about, 15 all the way to 30 feet.
Sure.
And as they closer to 15 when you're in the first week of July to, the end of August, they're closer to that 30 feet, but anywhere in between. But there's a strong bite there from the first week of July all the way into basically into October is where you can find fish on the deep rock. And that's something that year after year, you're going to be able to catch fish doing that. So it's really about breaking down the water by time of year and water temperature and the movement of those fish. And you can do this just about on any body of water. We recently, last few years, we're on Lake Wabisa now. And the first year I always could catch them, the first beginning of the year till about mid-June. And then I was like, done. But the last year I took a little bit more time and spent a little more time. And now I've got, I don't know, I'm pretty sure I can catch fish all summer long now on Lake Wabisa.
That's great.
So it doesn't take, just be aware of what you catch, when you catch it, and then try to reproduce it, expand the area. And I think you'll have fishing spots basically that you can in your memory or in your journal, you can go back to and reproduce year after year.
That's a great point. And I'm going to pull this guy off the shelf right here and just throw that up there for the viewers.
Oh, I didn't even know. Yes. That's super.
I put this together back when I was living on Lake Monona, and I did exactly that for a year. And I can say that's exactly what came out of it. It's a really cool thing to do. And I actually did it not for that reason. That was a kind of a side effect benefit. But when I had the twins, I wanted to kind of start creating some physical memories that I could stash photos and, write stories so that someday they can look back and there'll just be this box of memories of like random stuff. So I started a hunting journal last year and and I just took a year log from when I started, and I figured they can all fight over it in 20 years or whatever. But yeah, coming out of that, I looked back when I did it and I was like, this is pretty cool. I have dates, I have times, I have what I was using, I have relative water temps. And now granted, I'm kind of taking your advice and I'm doing it from shore. So like, don't think you need a boat or,
no.
crazy tools to do this. I mean, you can literally roll up to a public dock and write a journal about what you're catching from the dock with the worm. I mean, this is, you're just trying to record data, and that's all it is. You record the weather, water temp, maybe, the time of the day and the date, and it doesn't have to get crazier than that, really. But yeah, it's a very, very great tool if you're going to eventually expand where you're fishing. I think where for seasonality, and you can apply those um, techniques and kind of the mentality of where they're going to be based on temperature to almost anywhere. There's things that are going to change to what they're relating to, but there's definitely going to be movement based on temperature, shallow to deep, and that seems to be the same no matter where you're fishing. Like there's a depth and temperature ratio that seems to kind of jive with seasons if you're going to talk about like big picture seasonal movement. So that kind of leads me into the next beginner question, and you could definitely just piggyback it on the perspective of fishing here in Madison. But let's say somebody wanted to get into walleye fishing. We've covered that. They've got what they're going to go get from a rod standpoint. Now, if they had to pick their best season to get some success on the water, where would you kind of steer them and why?
So to me, any season.
Okay.
When you can go is the best season.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I happen to be all on board with that answer as a young parent. It's like just whenever you can go, just go. Yeah.
So if you're blessed and you get a chance to fish as many places as I do, right in my mind, I know places like I had mentioned earlier, the Detroit River in April. That's just a fantastic time to be out there. Although, one of my favorite times is midsummer on the deep bars on Mendota. So it really depends on when you have time. If you're a river fisherman, it's going to be the spring or the fall. There's if you pin me down to it, when is my favorite time to fish, it would probably be the fall. It would probably be on the Mississippi River, and you're going to get less pressure because more people there's more activities for people to do.
Yeah, you get hunting and fishing.
You get a lot of people that are
golf is still going, and there's just too many things for people to do in 12 hours of daylight or whatever it is, less than that.
And just in fall, what I absolutely love about it, especially in river fishing, is anywhere those fish are trying to feed up, fatten up for the winter. And if you get a cold snap in October, you might think, oh, it's a cold front. River fish are less, affected by changes in temperatures, cold fronts, and sometimes that can even trigger them to start biting. Like, hey, I need to really start feeding up. And when the bite is on the river, once you get into that 50-degree temp, it can be just fantastic. So it really depends, but there's always a bite somewhere. I'm convinced of it. Even right now, if you're an ice fisherman, there's a bite going on somewhere. You just have to find it. Yeah. And if you're with all the technology tools and everything that's online, you can find it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally true. You just put the time in. Speaking of time and efficiency, does your answer to that question change at all if you had to pick shore versus boat? Your answer had more of like a boat perspective per se, but I'm just curious if you had to fish from shore, would you change any of it?
Yeah.
Would you still pick fall?
I definitely would pick fall. If you're a bank fisherman, spring and fall are going to be probably your best opportunities, just because once you get into the summer months, fish are going to go deeper and they're a little bit harder to access from shore. So, but definitely fall. I've got a friend of mine who I would consider someone he's a good fisherman. He just didn't have an opportunity to fish as much as he'd like. And so he would fall, I guess, into the beginner stage. He moved to Madison maybe 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was working with him on a fall shore bite. And he just called me the other day, and now he wants to know when that happens in the spring, because he had a day last year where he caught 22 walleyes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And just hooked. And many of them were in that slot range.
Yeah.
In the first few times he went, he didn't catch much, if anything. But now he's got a feel for it. It's that time on the water. But yeah, fall, I think, is whether you're in a boat or on the shore, it's hard to beat.
Yeah. What kind of structure? So where would you kind of give some advice on structure, what to look for, let's say specifically for that novice shore angler getting into it? Let's just assume you don't have access to a boat at this point and really attack the beginner aspect here of walleye fishing. So you're going to bank bust, you're going to fish in the fall. I'm assuming some of these answers may apply to all seasons, but what are you looking for as far as shore access? Where do you want to fish from shore to maximize your success rate?
So if I'm on a lake system from shore, I'm looking for current. So
Okay.
if you can find bottleneck areas where if you have a chain of lakes where the lake's skinny up, that's going to increase it's going to increase water flow, and those fish will come up, especially in low light conditions. So if there's a railroad trestle or just a bridge, if you can think of bays, but you can reproduce that just about anywhere in the upper Midwest. That if you're just look on a map and look for areas that constrict where you think current would be, that would be my number one thing that I would look for. If
Okay.
I'm from shore, I'm looking at current seams, or on a river, I'm looking at current seams. So where you have fast water, and then you'll have an eddy where there's kind of calm water. And if you can have deep water that's accessible by cast, where you can cast out into the current and you pretty much know it's deeper water. You'll find out. Just throw a quarter ounce jig and
right,
count until it hits the bottom, and you'll know how deep it is.
that's a hot tip for all you people out there that want to know how you can figure out the depth without any sort of fancy gadgets. Just put on a heavy jig, cast it out there, and count down how long it takes to hit the bottom.
Yeah, and you'll know pretty quick. And then the same thing, or if you wanted to use a crankbait like a shad wrap or a flicker shad, something to cast out, and you'd feel the bottom. So what I'm looking for is current seams where you have slack water and you've got some decent depth, and that's really all I'm looking for. And I'm experimenting and finding that area that has deeper water. And if you just throw a 4-inch twister tail, you'll get bit if there's fish around. And so you'll learn for sure.
I'll believe it.
Yeah, and the other thing is you can just look for people. When you drive by, if you go by when there's a hot bite in the spring on the Wisconsin River, you're going to see people fishing. And I remember when I first moved to Madison, I thought you had to use a jig and a minnow. I didn't.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it has to be a jig and a minnow. And I stood next to a guy that was casting a 3-inch chartreuse jig and just reeling in nice and slow, and he was just pounding them.
Yeah.
I wasn't catching anything. And you know what I did? The next time I came with a 3-inch twister with a quarter.
Right.
And I started catching fish.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I'd be looking for.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great answer. And that's super helpful for somebody getting into it, because there is just so much to consider. You look at, even if you know or have looked at maps before, you've never fished this body of water. I mean, there's a lot of areas that, like, man, that looks good. That looks good. That looks good. So to really fine tune that a little bit and pick 1 or 2 spots that looks like it'd be better than the other spots and start there. I think that's really helpful, especially coming to a new body of water for a beginner.
Yeah. And if it's a river, just look for a dam. And generally, for the most part, if you have a dammed up portion of the river, there's usually public access near it. And
that's a good thing to know.
And fish will congregate up at the dams in the spring and the fall. And it's just a great time to catch fish, and there's plenty of opportunities to do it. When I lived in St. Louis right after college, I looked on a map and I saw the Kaskaskia River was dammed below Lake Shelbyville and below Carlisle Lake. And that's what I did, as I drove an hour and 45 minutes up to Shelbyville, and it took maybe 3 or 4 times before I actually caught one, but I figured it out. And
Yeah. I'm sure there's some nice fish in there.
yeah, there's definitely some nice fish, and it's just a fun way. I still love to do it. I don't do it near as much as I used to, but in fact, that's back to a tip on what size rod. I used to have a 6'6" rod because that was all it would fit in my Mercury Topaz.
There you go.
So
that's a good point,
I'd
right?
prefer a 7-foot rod, but that, and I also had
you
one
use
that,
what you can.
yeah, I had one that collapsed just so I could make sure I could fold it up and put it in there too. So whatever works with your,
Right.
your situation, you can make work to catch fish.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So I kind of already know the answer to this, but I just want to ask it and see if I'm not aware of some out there. But so for your pro tournaments on the walleye circuit, everything is during the day, I'm assuming, and it's a set number of hours. Is there anything out there as far as night fishing on the pro level, or any sort of tournament night fishing for walleyes?
So I don't think, for safety reasons, I don't think there's anything like like a takeoff and,
Sure.
you leave at sunrise or sunset and you come back at sunrise or midnight
Sure.
or whatever. But there is I'm sure there's other places that do something similar, but on Lake Erie, they have the fall brawl, and you can fish at any time to catch the biggest walleye that you can. And you come and weigh it in, and at the end of the year, whoever catches, I think it might be the end of October or mid-October through November.
Okay.
And there's a lot of guys that fish, they troll shallow stick baits at night, and they catch some really big fish.
That's awesome. And I've heard kind of it, but I had no idea that it was like that was the format. That's really cool.
Yeah, you can catch them. It doesn't matter when you catch them. You just have to, or I'm pretty sure you just, in that case, you wouldn't be able to weigh it in until the morning. So you'd have to keep that fish alive.
Sure.
But definitely bring them in. And night fishing, that's a totally different thing. That's
yeah. No, that's a separate podcast.
It's a lot of fun. It takes a certain kind of angler to do it, but really low light conditions for walleye, especially on bodies of water that are clear and get a lot of pressure, is a great time to catch fish.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I kind of hesitated to bring it up because I think it would be in the conversation, like where you would point somebody as a beginner getting into walleye fishing, if you want them to have success sooner rather than later for the factors we talked about. But I think you have to simultaneously have a safety conversation. And there's just so many more things that can go wrong around water at night. And that's a can of worms that's different for everywhere you're fishing, whether you're on shore or from a boat, or on a river or on a lake. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, I think it also depends on if you're in a metro area or a rural area. There's a lot of factors that you have to start thinking about that you wouldn't have to think about them during the day, but there's another variable without having the light to see what's going on.
Yeah, it's you have to have a little bit more specialized equipment to do stuff like that and be aware of your surroundings a little bit more. Even tying a hook can be, or tying your bait can be a challenge if you're not prepared, but you learn that one pretty quick. But yeah, there's a lot of things to consider. And then, even, you can catch fish until late fall doing that until, basically until ice up. But then you've got boat ramps that can ice up. And I've had a friend that, took one step out of the truck as we were loading the boat and fell and hit his elbow. It didn't break it, but just about did. So yeah.
Yeah, it sounds painful.
Be careful.
Yeah. Well, I think what we should do is let's table the night fishing for a separate episode, because I really kind of want to dig pretty deep into night fishing on its own and maybe touch on a couple other species. But I kind of want to close here and just ask you a fun question of what you like to fish for when you're not tournament fishing. Is it still walleyes? And if not, what is it?
So yes, it's still walleyes,
Okay.
but I do kind of have a soft spot for catching some nice bluegills, whether it's sitting on a bucket. So I give walleye fishing a rest in the winter. For the most part, I sit on a bucket and catch perch or bluegill. But in the summer, when the bluegills suspend on these Madison lakes, I love to do that.
Yeah, that summer bite in Madison for bluegills is really special, and that's one of those that kind of like what we talked about earlier. You got to learn electronics, and you got to have access to a boat. Once you get those two things and you find it, it is incredible. It's you can have the days out there in the summer where everybody else is just dragging, and you can have days like you could have over a bucket on the ice and catch 90 fish in an hour and a half, and they're all eaters. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's something I can do with my wife, although she
Yeah.
outfishes me
Right. You got to be
walleye too.
careful on
So
that one,
yeah,
right?
so I can't take her all the time. I lose my ego gets a little bruised.
No, that's a lot of fun. And panfish are just great. They're all around just a great target to enjoy fishing. They're good table fare. They really serve a lot of fishermen, and they do get kind of labeled as like that gateway to fishing, if you will. But for good reason. I mean, if if you're open to fishing for anything and you are a beginner, don't get hung up on, certainly go try walleye fishing. Like that's why we're telling you about it. It's fun. There's all fishing's fun, let's be honest. But bluegill's a great start. And if you haven't started there, start there. It's a lot of fun. And like you're saying, maybe in the wintertime you're giving walleyes a break and that's your passion during the open water months. And then, maybe, listen to a couple episodes on ice fishing and figure out how to catch some bluegills through the ice. And yeah, mix it up a little bit. So,
And true, and if you're a parent that wants to get their children into fishing, that's really really important to give them action. Might
right.
not be where you want to start with walleye because the kids can lose interest. Whereas even if you just catch a couple of bluegills and put them in the live well, or if you're fishing from shore, put it in a bucket, they'll have as much fun poking at it and
Yep.
staring at it, and it keeps them interested versus you know oh, we're going walleye fishing again,
Yeah.
because it can be, you might catch 3 walleyes one day and that's really good, but to a kid that's really boring.
Yep.
And so if you can expose those kids to some fun and action, then I think you can create someone that has a passion for the sport. And there's a lot of worse things that are a lot worse things that kids can be doing other than fishing. It's
For
just
sure.
a great, great hobby. And if you start them young, they'll probably have that passion for most of their life. It certainly was for me.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I can definitely personally attest with my youngsters. That's kind of where I chose to start both open water and ice fishing. I've taken them out a few times ice fishing, and I've been lucky enough to have both days where I took them and we caught a couple bluegills. And then I have days where we got out and we didn't catch any, and it was only 15, 20 minutes. But that's kind of the point I wanted to make, was that if you're not catching them, don't sit there until you do. Like, even if you're bluegill fishing and the expectation is you catch 5 or 6, like if it's been 15, 20 minutes and they're like, let's go, like, let's go. You don't want to burn the bridge. Like, they were nice enough and excited enough to get out there and give you 15 minutes. If the fish or you couldn't make something happen, that's not their fault. Like, don't burn their attention bridge just because they weren't, the fish weren't playing ball. Just come back another day. Like, they wanted to
Absolutely.
go and they had fun, and to them, like, you're just proving the point that fishing isn't catching. And so don't beat yourself up because they didn't bite or you didn't catch a fish for them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And then, yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea to leave them at home every once in a while too,
Yeah.
because then they'll be like, oh, I really wanted to go fishing.
Yep.
And it kind of, it really puts fire into their kind of passion to do it. They want to be with dad. And,
Yep. Take
you
some
know,
pictures or videos that also reinforces that, because they get all like, that's just another form of excitement when you do get home. Like, hey, did you take a picture? Did you get a video? And
Absolutely.
that was total shock. Like when I started doing this stuff and I would show them, and I just didn't anticipate that part of it. Like they were legitimately excited to see my pictures and videos that I was making. And like, that's just so, to me, that made it all worth it. And it wasn't even like on the radar. Like I was doing, like I really wanted to get them out doing it with me. And I did. And then I have this other time where I'm going out to kind of like reset my batteries personally. And that's just, one of the fun things I do to reset my brain. But they enjoyed seeing me resetting my brain. Like they wanted to see the catch. They wanted to see the goofy dances and all this other stuff. And they loved it. I'm like, that's fantastic. I get to double dip. I get to go have fun time and then come back and show them. And they love it. So that's really cool.
Yeah. The last thing I'll add on that is I do a number of charity guide trips, and I'm amazed. I still am every time when I take kids out at how good they are at reading the electronics. Their parents have no idea. It takes them forever, where the kids are like, is that a fish? That's a fish. And they'll say, hey, we should leave. There are no fish on the screen. So they really,
and they're right.
Yeah, they're right. And they're absolutely, they really pick up the electronics, and they like that part of it too.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, Roy. Well, I think we've been chatting a good bit here. We've got some great talk. Do you have anything you want to wrap up with? Pro Angler, you got what kind of sponsors you dealing with this year? People backing you out on the Pro Tour. You want to give them a little plug?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It starts with LUND Boats and Mercury Marine. They've been fantastic. Locally here, Faro Marine. If you're looking for a boat, whether it's a LUND boat or a pleasure boat, they're fantastic. Go see Andy; he'll take good care of you. Shimano, Minn Kota, and Humminbird are all on board. Great products. And Zone Lock hooks, you can buy those now at Walmart. They're really good hooks. It's all in the bend. Take a look, get them if you can. And other than that, I think what you're doing here is great, especially now you're in the middle of a pandemic. More people are being exposed to the outdoors and want to learn more about fishing. And really, if you can help people catch fish, then they're going to stay out, can continue to fish, grow our sport. That's really what it's all about.
Right. We're all on the same team, and the more people we get playing ball, the better. That's the way I'm looking at it anyway.
Absolutely.
Just helping people enjoy the outdoors. And not all of us had a mentor growing up, and that's kind of I'll sing that to the end of my days. Like it just, in some forms I did, and in some forms I didn't. Hunting, I did not, just because I had a mentor, but I didn't get into hunting until after he had passed. So it was a lot of, in fact, it was almost all DIY, adult learning. Whereas with fishing, I fished with my mentors growing up. So it's really nice to have that dichotomy perspective. Like, okay, so I know what it's like to have the rapport, the camaraderie as a kid, being brought up in the outdoors in certain facets, and then also what it's like to not have it and have to figure it out on your own. And so, I really feel for people out there that want to get into it and just have no family or friend outlet, and they're just having to reach out to strangers essentially, or to read information on their own to get into it. So the lower we can make that barrier to entry, the better. I think we're doing each other a favor.
I agree 100%.
So, all right, Roy. Well, this has been fantastic and super fun. We'll have to do this again. Like I said, maybe talk some night fishing. Maybe we'll do a podcast on sheephead. We'll see what shakes out.
I've caught a couple big ones.
All right, Roy. It's been fantastic. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
If you have questions, reach out, info@vitaltradition.com. And you can always check out our website, www.vitaltradition.com. We'll see you on the next one.